Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. Before we get started with tonight's event, I just have a few logistics to point out for how it's going to go. First off, we do ask that you keep your mask on at all times while at this event. We will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After tonight's talk, Laura will be signing and personalizing books at the table next to the check-in desk at the front. If you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we'd love to encourage you to buy a copy of Small World online using the link in the live stream description. So it's been a very exciting week of events here at our new store on Montague Street, and it's so wonderful to wrap up this fantastic week with authors Laura Zigman, Julie Klam, and Anne Leary, who join us tonight to celebrate the launch of Laura's newest novel, Small World. Woo! Small World has been hailed as wryly funny, deeply moving, and sharply observed. The novel follows two newly divorced sisters, Joyce and Lydia, as they are forced to reckon with the trials of adulthood, the traumas of their childhood, and what may be the worst thing imaginable, to me at least, moving in with your sister as an adult. Laura Zigman is the author of Separation Anxiety, Animal Husbandry, Dating Big Bird, Piece of Work, and Her. She has been a contributor to the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Huffington Post. She lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And as I mentioned earlier, Laura is joined in conversation by Julie Klam and Anne Leary. Julie started as an intern at Late Night with David Letterman, and then went on to write for magazines and VH1 television show Pop-Up Video, where she earned an Emmy nomination for Outstanding Special Class Writing. Her books include Please Excuse My Daughter, You Had Me at Woof, Love at First Spark, Friend Keeping, The Stars in Our Eyes, and the almost legendary Morris Sisters. Anne Leary is the New York Times bestselling author of the novels The Children, The Good House, Outtakes from a Marriage, and the memoir An Innocent Abroad. She has written for numerous publications including Plowshares, NPR, Real Simple, and the New York Times. Her new novel, The Foundling, was released last May. All right, that's all from me. Without any further delay, please join me in welcoming Laura, Julie, and Anne.
So graceful.
We should do like the opening. I'm Anne Leary.
I'm Julie Klam.
And I'm Laura Zigman. Welcome to Hashtag.
So for people who might not know, we had this little radio show once, and it was called Hashtags, and that's how we used to open it.
Yeah.
So it's so nice.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming here tonight, and I'm so happy to be with my two besties.
I know. It's been a while. The last time I saw Laura was at her book event at Books Are Magic on Smith Street for Separation Anxiety, and Anne was supposed to come, but she had COVID. Woo!
No,
It was like right before the lockdown, and we were all like, what? You know.
Well, I didn't know I had COVID because it was like that March when people didn't really know what was going on. Then we realized later that I had written jokes about COVID because we never knew. It was like so early on we didn't know what lay ahead, and so later on no one would write. It was like jokes about me dying.
Yeah, Laura, Anne sent questions in for me to ask, and they were things like, do I call it the coronavirus or COVID?
Yeah, like, where you can have
And
my
it
clothes
was
and I
at
die.
her party. Was the first time I went to an event where I washed my hands when I came in the door. Anyway.
She's been washing them ever since.
I really haven't. So we're here for
Laura.
Laura's unbelievably beautiful, moving, hilarious, fabulous new novel, Small World. I first read it, and then you're going to ask questions. I first read it on my computer, which I hate doing, and I read it slower than a regular book, but I still read it. And then when I got the galley, I said I should look it over to refresh my memory, and I started reading it, and I read the whole thing again, and every time I pick it up to look at something, I read it because it's so beautiful. It's just amazing.
Yes. It is. And I have an original issue, like a first edition, I don't know how many editions they did. I have an animal husbandry. Years before I ever met Laura, or I thought I might meet her, I was a huge fan of Laura Zigman because I loved her first novel. That was your first novel, correct? Yeah. Animal Husbandry. And I still have the original hardcover. I read a review, had to get it. So I've loved all of Laura's books, and I love Laura. And but this one, I have to say, might be my favorite. I loved, as you know, the three of us are really good friends. So I read a few drafts, or just and have been talking about it with Laura over the years. It involves some personal. You know, it's a novel, but there's some personal history. Some of it I knew and some of it I didn't. So we won't go into too much of that now, but let's just start. Laura, tell just whoever might not have read it yet, want to give a little introduction to your book?
Yes, well, I'm thrilled to be here and with my two great friends and friends in the audience. So, Small World started as a novel I started writing during COVID when I was home, and I thought it would be kind of a situation comedy where the neighbors dealing with difficult neighbors, where you're living downstairs and upstairs you get new neighbors, and all of a sudden your world sucks. And that had happened to us. We had neighbors upstairs, new neighbors upstairs, and then I realized I didn't want to write just a story about kind of a family or a couple dealing with. I had just written about a couple, and then I thought, what if it were two sisters? And then I thought, ooh, what if my sister, who left a long time ago and moved out west, like Lydia in the book, what if she moved back? What if we were both divorced with no kids, because it's easier to write a book with no kids? But what if we moved in together as adults, having not really known each other all this time, and what would that be like? And then I thought that will be really, really fun to do, because for those of us who have siblings, nobody presses your buttons like your sibling does. And so, this was also a great opportunity for me to finally write about my family. And I had wanted to write about my family. I thought I wanted to write a memoir, and years ago I tried to write a memoir, and I realized I just didn't have enough material for a memoir. I had a sister who died when she was 7, but she died, she was institutionalized in this place called Fernald, which is in the book. And everything sort of happened outside of our house. We didn't know her. I was 3 years old. My sister Linda was 5. And so we didn't have a relationship with her. And mostly our childhood was kind of like in the shadow of my parents' grief, and the activism that they did after that. And so I thought, well, can't really write a memoir about that, and that would be really a dull way to dramatize this whole thing. So instead I knew a family in Cambridge who had 2 sons and this daughter, Eleanor, just like in the book. And she is the center of their universe. She lives at home. She's has multiple disabilities. And you come over for dinner, she's at the center of the table. There's a whole protocol how, she likes to take your order and all this stuff. And everything revolves around her. And I was just amazed. There's a lot of joy in the family. But I also knew that the sons were a little bit on the fringes of that. Like, as great as the family was to them too, there's a cost for that. Like, you can't win. And especially those of us who are parents know that no matter what you do, it's not gonna be right for everyone. So the fact that they made her the center was kind of exclusionary to the other boys, the 2 boys and stuff. So I thought that's really interesting. So that's what I did in this book. It had Eleanor living at home. It's in the early 70s. And their mother is really obsessed with her and obsessed with inclusion. And the irony is, it's inclusion with the other 2 being sort of excluded from that. So it was a great way to finally tap into a lot of stuff that I had never written about and fictionalize it too.
So I was curious. I mean, I think a lot of people reading the book are not going to know that it's your story. But I obviously knew that there was similarities, and so I saw you as Joyce, and I wondered if when you were writing it, and since this is a small group, and we have thousands of viewers millions of viewers on the video, were there things that you thought of and you said, I just can't do this? You don't have to say what they were, but were there?
Yeah, I mean, my sister and I have been very close over the years, and then we hit a rough spot when our parents were sick. So we didn't really speak for a few years. It was not a pleasant time for either of us, and we had established like a peace. And I was really nervous because I wanted to write this, and I didn't, at some point she was going to ask me, what are you writing about? And I didn't want her to think that I was going to cover that territory. So I did something that I don't normally do. I was really communicative and honest, and I just said, I'm going to write this book, and I'm not going to talk about anything that has to do with that. It's going to be just, and she sort of cut me off, and she just said, I trust you. She said, just write your book. And given what we'd been through, that was just like a complete gift. And then I wrote it, and I sent it to her, and I said, I want you to read it, and if there's anything you don't like, and I want you to tell me. And then I was like, I didn't hear anything for about 9 days, and I got kind of nervous, and then she texted me and she said, well, I'm halfway through. And then I was waiting for the dots, but there weren't any dots. So I said, I hope you don't hate it. She said, nope, I don't hate it. And then there were no dots. And then a few days passed, and then she finished it, and she said it was really hard to read. She loved it, and then we've had an amazing series of conversations since then, because she, like Lydia, I think, this is very fictionalized from our story, but the essence of a lot of the pieces of it are really true. And so there are parts of it that she doesn't have a lot of memory of certain things, and so we've had the opportunity to really kind of talk about a lot of stuff, and that's been great, and she's been great. So I think it's been really a nice thing. It worked out, luckily. Yeah.
I love that. And maybe if you do want to read, at some point, isn't there a part where
Yeah,
Lydia
actually,
arrived?
I'm only going to read the second page. Don't worry, don't panic.
Did you
Everyone.
get to yeah.
Someone just was on Twitter recently, and they said, what's the most amount of time you should read at a reading? Like 20 to 30 minutes? And I
No,
was
my
like,
God.
I mean, people were just like, no, 9 minutes,
1
5.
second.
5.
I did an event with my brother, and he told me he had a 15-minute reading. And I was like, if you do that, I'm going to throw myself on the floor and scream during it. So decide. And he cut it down. And he was looking at me the whole time he was reading. Like,
So this is from pretty early in the book. It's when Lydia comes from California and comes to Cambridge. It's a gray January afternoon when I pick Lydia up from the airport, the kind of day that always reminds me of how hard it is to live here on the East Coast in New England. When, in the cold, wet shock of air in the open parking garage, she says about the weather, nice, great, I've really missed this. I resist the urge to apologize for it, even though it still feels like my fault, this freezing cold welcome home, a bracing slap across the face, which I can't help but think she kind of deserves for leaving me alone here for so long. She has 2 bags, a carry-on and a large silver metal case that she checked, and when I put them in the trunk, I compliment her on her light packing job. Everything else is in storage, she says, pulling a thin, bright orange puffer jacket out of her carry-on for the ride home. Brad was kind enough to offer to ship it once I get settled. That was nice of Brad. Wasn't it, she said? But then Brad's always been a nice person, much nicer than me. It occurs to me then that Brad was my brother-in-law for almost 20 years, and yet I have no idea how true that statement is. Who is Brad? Who is Lydia? Living so far away from each other made it almost impossible to know. And now it doesn't even matter. Divorce makes the past irrelevant. He's gone, and she's here, and now, for the first time in years, probably since Louise's funeral 5 years ago, we're both in the same car heading home. I take the scenic route back from the airport, making sure to take Starrow Drive and then Memorial Drive so that Lydia can see what she's missed all these years. The sexy curve of the Charles River, the runners snaking alongside it despite the cold, the indigo sky, a color and texture only Van Gogh or Turner could mix. I park on the street in front of my apartment on the first floor of a midnight blue Victorian on a leafy street not far from Harvard Square. And on the way into the house, she stops, resting her bag on the brick sidewalk. She stares up at the sky and takes in a long, deep, cold breath, then exhales it in a big gray cloud. All the trees are bare, and the tiny bit of light that guided us home from the airport is fading fast. Winter, she says softly, reverentially, looking at me over her shoulder with an unusually sweet smile. Somewhere nearby, someone's fireplace is lit and we can both smell it. I've kind of missed it. For a second, I step outside myself. My sister, who has not lived here in decades, is finally back, on her way into my apartment, where the two of us are about to be roommates for a while. Suddenly, too late, I'm terrified. This could be a disaster. It likely will be a disaster. All the old wounds of childhood and beyond will definitely resurface, and then we'll fight, and then we'll be stuck together in the same house for who knows how long, and then she'll leave, and it will end badly, really badly. So badly that we might never talk to each other again after that. Whose idea was this? I don't believe you missed it, I said. I said I kind of missed it, not that I really missed it. She pulls on her bag and follows me up the walk and inside the vestibule. As I lead the way, I think I hear her say, I'm so excited to see your place again, but part of me is certain I imagined it.
So that's an example of what a beautiful writer Laura is. But what I love about Laura's writing is she's so this obviously the material there is heavy. It's heavy, and there's a child and a death, and it's so funny. Laura. So I love you always do like a whimsical kind of device in these novels that I love. In Separation Anxiety, it was the woman wanting to carry her dog around in the pouch, and in this it was this wonderful thing with the Small World, which was like next door. It was like these neighborhood apps, and I'd love you to explain that a little bit, because I just thought it was great. And it also, well, go ahead to explain that, but it's just something that to me is like a Laura Zigman kind of trademark. It's just just when you're like, oh, this is, I'm about to die laughing. I was about to cry. No,
Do people know Nextdoor app?
The app, like the neighborhood.
When you read the book, it's going to change your life when you read the Nextdoor app. That's all I'm saying.
So I have a friend on he's a professor in Maryland at University, American Studies professor, and he, a couple times a year, he'll just post on Facebook. He'll do his Baltimore listserv, his neighborhood listserv, and he'll just do like he would just cut just the same thing. He would make a post into poems. He wouldn't change a word. And so I was like, I saw them, and I remember I wrote to him and I said, you should do, I'm like a frustrated agent. I was like, you should do a book. And no, he's like, I'm kind of busy, I have a job. And like, I don't, but so I just thought I'm going to use these somehow. And I loved having it because I thought it was really great in the book, but I also just loved the excuse of not, when you're not writing, you have to like research. And so I would just go down the rabbit hole every day. I would start to get the Nextdoor. I still get them, and I have not stopped my notifications, but all the lost cats and all the the bad turkeys, the turkey attack, and this happened and that happened, and then interspersed in the avocados that were stolen from my Whole Foods order, and in the midst of all those bougie kind of issues that are so next door were really moving posts. Like, people get on there and they're so lonely, so moving, and there are people from other countries. There was one that's at the very beginning of the book, and people are lonely, or they write these really long posts. And then I turned my first draft I turned in, and I was so excited. And my editor was like, I love the poems. I said, I do too. And she goes, they're so well written. I said, I know, I took them exactly off the internet. And she goes, oh, you can't legally, And I felt so stupid, but I loved that they were totally authentic, that they were, I prided myself on the fact I didn't change a word. This is what they are. And look at the poem. So then it was a bummer because I had to then rewrite them. And I used maybe one line from each, which I think is legal, but because each one had a story or it had a message, and even the goofy ones were so great. But I loved being able to do that and sort of just placing them. But they're hilarious, and I still spend way too much time on Nextdoor. I love it.
I think my favorite part of the book is at Camp Fantastic. Joyce and Lydia accompany their mother and sister. It's as sort of an afterthought. The mother announces that she found a camp for the daughter, the disabled daughter, Eleanor, to go to. And Joyce is 6 years old. And the dad is like, well, who's going to take care of these kids? And she says, they don't need anything, or they don't need as much as Eleanor. I'm paraphrasing. Yeah. And the kids are sitting there it was like I had like this unbelievable sort of like flash into the exhausting nature of childhood when you're like, I don't even know what's wrong. And she's like, well, do you have any problem? Like she asked them, do you have any problems? And they're like, it was so brilliantly done. And then going to camp was unbelievable. Was there anything like that in your life?
You know, that was also something I took when I was procrastinating. I watched the Crip Camp documentary on Netflix, and there's a lot of nodding because everyone probably watched it. It was a great documentary. And I had never known that those, I think there were several camps, but that was one incredible camp. And I was so, like, I never knew there was such a thing. And all those people that went were so empowered in later years and became such incredible activists and had these amazing jobs. And I was just fascinated by it. And I thought, well, that would be really cool if Eleanor went to that camp and what that would have been like. And it was a way also to just really illustrate how excluded they were from, you know, when there's a term for it now, and then there wasn't when I was growing up, but it's called well child syndrome. And it's really about when you are in a family where there's a child with disabilities or special needs or sick, cancer or whatever. And, then there's the well children or the well child, and your role is very different. You're not sick and you're well. And so you don't get all that stuff because you can do it on your own, or the attention is understandably so focused on the child that needs it most. So I just thought it would be so great if then the guy who runs the camp really sees them, and for the first time, like, they're actually included in the inclusion, if the inclusion includes them. And I also wanted it to be really clear that, like, Louise is not a bad mother. She's just, like, trying to do the best thing that she knows what,
when my brother did an event with Laura last night, and we talked about the book.
Two clams for the
two
places.
clams. We talked about the book the other day, and Matthew was so furious with the mother, and I was like, well, he hated her and had no empathy. And I was thinking how interesting it is when you read something and you have a sibling who had the same parents as you, and you have these reactions, like something there. My mother definitely did something with him that she didn't do with me. He was also the middle child, not very bright. But afterwards, I kept thinking, like, I felt like I empathize with her because I always feel like the mother who screws up in everything, even But it was very interesting to me, just sort of like as a Rorschach test.
Well, it is. I think it's also like we're all watching in real time, Prince Harry. Sorry, I just took the Acela and I've never listened to an audiobook, and I was like, okay, here we go. And I listened to Spare all the way to DC and almost the rest of it on the way. And I mean, it's like a real-time story of siblings. I mean, and this is his version. Who knows what his brother's version is? But it's exactly true. You can grow up in the same family and have two completely different, versions, and also two very different experiences in the same family. Like, my sister had a very different experience. I'm sure your sibling, you have a sister and a brother, right?
Yeah.
It's weird. You're in the family, and yet, like, really?
Right.
Very different. Your personalities can be totally different. So
Yeah,
it's really...
I mean, I write nonfiction, and everybody in my family debates the things that I've written about. I am right. But, no, it's interesting.
I realized, in addition to my phone that I was looking for when we were dashing out, I had a few pull lines from the amazing reviews this book has received. Sorry, I'm not sick. I have a scratchy throat from allergies. But I just wanted to say, I found it personally gratifying as your friend to see this book in different iterations, and then just see how how much the reviewers loved it and have
astounding
the
reviews.
praise.
Yes,
really well-deserved praise.
Well, I do have to say, so Anne, we've been friends and everything. Anne is a really great reader. So I was about, I think, a little bit more than halfway through the book, and I just I had no idea where I was going, none. And if you ever need, send it to Anne. So I sent it to Anne, and she read it, and it was like, whatever. The other thing was that I had written the whole thing in like second person, and whatever. And you suggested I just keep the flashbacks in second person, but you should all have such a good reader to
I love fixing other people's books. Although I don't always fix them, but it's my favorite thing to do. And it reminds me, when I was in college, I would like have an overdue paper, but I'd write someone else's paper. I don't know why. I like to meddle.
Easier to do something.
But no, it's easier to see. But your writing was so good, and then
Right.
someone else can easily see. Oh wait, maybe this should be.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Nobody can. No, not easily. I
You
can't read
not do
other
that?
people's. I can't read anybody else's stuff. I read everything, and I'm like, this is great, amazing. How did you do this? You know, I could not be an editor or a publisher or anything, but I'm a good friend.
How did your so has your sister? So she liked the book. Do you are you going to be going out? She's still living in California. Are you going to be?
Yeah, I think I might go out to LA I am going out to LA for the LA Times Book Festival.
Oh,
So that'll be nice. Yeah.
All right. And was there? Because I think the three of us have, L authors, I think, who've written about their families have struggled with how much to tell. Is it my story to tell, or is it? I guess I have definitely struggled with that. Tell me. Oh, I guess Julia already asked this question. There were things you left out, but.
Well, I think, it was easier that my parents are gone.
Yeah.
And I think that if they had been around, I probably still would have maybe written it, but I don't, because it's so they are so fictionalized. The parents are nothing like my parents. I mean, they're the most fictionalized part of the book, but, and I think they would have been like ecstatic to see Cheryl on the dedication page. Like they always just loved, especially my father would just love to see that she was remembered.
Wow.
And so that's hugely important. So I think the Boston Globe review actually called that out, like called the dedication out. So that would have been, if they weren't dead already, they would have died from seeing it in the book and then seeing it in the Globe, quoted, like her name, like they would have just like fallen over. But so I feel really good about that. I mean, I feel like they weren't not here to see it, but like it doesn't matter. But I'm really glad in a way that it feels like there's some circle that closed, because, the other thing is that, when I moved back to Boston in plenty of time to go get more information about my family. And my sister had lived in this institution, and I had many, many, many years. I moved back to Boston in 2001. My parents were alive, could have asked them tons of questions. I didn't. I was like, not interested. And I lived 3 miles away from Fernald, which was parts of it had been closing down, but the building that my sister had lived in, there was a swimming pool, and this family that I just mentioned who have an Eleanor, like they would take the Eleanor to swim there. It was a state-of-the-art pool that was built many years ago, but you can actually push a wheelchair in and whatever. So it was like I could have done so much research and I could have found out so much, but I was just really angry. I was like, no, I have spent my whole life, I'm done. And then of course, they're gone, and I never really asked them that many questions. And then by the time I was actually curious, I drove over there, and it was like you couldn't get in. I found one entrance where I got in. There was a chain, and I managed to get in, and I was chased off. It was trespassing by that point. The institution had completely shut down. Now, if you go on the internet and you Google it, you'll see it looks like one of those really scary abandoned places, which is a tragedy. But I was sort of like didn't go soon enough, and I regret that. But it's like you're only ready when you're ready, and I was like not ready till 20 years later or something like that.
No, you're not. I should have bought an apartment when I was 12 on Vegas Street. It would have been good. So one of the things that you do in the book, the character of Joyce, her job is putting together the memories of families, photos, and videos for them. And when she's doing them, she makes little corrections. Sometimes correction isn't the right word, but if there's an unsafe element, she fixes it in the picture. If they're look like they're going to fall off a mountain, she puts a rope across. If they're about to go skiing and they have beer, she changes it to soda. And I was thinking, is that what Joyce wanted to do in her own life?
I thought you were going to say, is that what Jews do? And I was going to say, yes, that is what Jews do.
The Jews don't go skiing.
That's the whole thing. I'm sorry, what was
Not
your
my
question?
I was asking you if like Joyce would have wanted to go back into her own life to make the corrections, to make things safer and better.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, that was a really helpful idea that Anne gave me, something like that, and I was like, ooh, that would be so great, because they live when Eleanor is alive with like lots of rules, and you have to be really careful, and everything has to be done a certain way for her safety, and this thing happened, and they didn't do anything stupid. They didn't go skiing drunk. They didn't leave the kid near the pool and have something terrible happen. They were super careful, and she died anyway. And she's like partly very angry that these people get to like just live,
Right.
and it's not fair. I mean, that is the whole thing, is like the sense of fairness.
Right.
Like, it's just not fair.
Right.
I think it was really effective. That and the, kind of arranging other people's, the neighbors. It's the whole theme of the book, or one of the themes of the books is community and being feeling like an outsider, maybe in your own family, in your neighborhood, being alienated from your siblings, and so I just love the way in your books you tend to just a little bit. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
It is allergies. Mischief, like your novels. Sorry, I don't have COVID. Anyway, that was just like another example of, but they're not just there for fun. They really are. I think they work really well as metaphors for what the book is really about, and so I really love that. But I also wanted to say I really love the way you really brought the atmosphere of the 70s. Like you really, and so you don't have to be as old as us too. But I did really see it in this kind of like
Sepia
Brady
tones.
Bunch colors, and also like everyone I think had some trauma in their family. Maybe not as severe trauma as that. Okay, guys, I had COVID 2 months ago, and I had a flu a month ago. So every evening my throat gets scratchy. Sorry. It's so embarrassing. Like coughing in public, I'm told, is the new farting in public. I'm dying right now. But you're not going to die because I have nothing wrong with me. Anyway, I just felt not a note was off. It felt like very much. Was that hard? I'm going to stop talking.
Well, I think having the old me would have written there would have been a whole subplot about like how the next door posts, then they posted and something happened. There would be some caper around it, and then that just didn't really feel right. I think for me it was really the point was like, I think we all, especially now post-COVID, or we're still in it, but feeling this sense of like we want community, we want to see people, and then we see people and we just can't wait to go home. Or I speak for myself, but like people are so freaked out, and it's like you want to be with people but you don't, and if you like Joyce and Lydia grew up having people in their house all the time. I mean, my parents had fundraised for Fernald for years and years and years, way after Cheryl died. And there were always people, when you're 8 years old and you come downstairs and like 3 couples on a Saturday night are bridge mixes out and they're having their cigarettes, and then all of a sudden you hear them crying, and who's going to take care of my kid when I'm dead? You're watching Mary Tyler Moore and you're like, oh, but there's crying people. Like that was those were the conversations we would overhear all the time. Like it wasn't like they were talking about vacations. It was like the conversations would go from regular fun stuff to all of a sudden, because all the people that were at Fernald who had kids there, their kids were in their 20s or 30s, and we were the ones who, Cheryl had died, but all of them had kids that were and so they were getting older. These people were getting older, and they were starting to panic. But those were the kinds of conversations. So like when you grow up, like that's the bedrock of your consciousness. Like it's just a very different thing. It's not, people have much more overtly traumatic childhoods than I had, for sure. But that was like this like noise in the background. It was always this really sad thing. And like you just you grow up with a very different mindset, I think.
Well, I think like everyone suffers from, I have a problem, but I'm not in the Ukraine being bombed. I'm not in a concentration camp. I'm not in, jail. And so, but to have something that close to you that you're like, I'm bummed out and school sucks, but I'm not in a wheelchair and I can talk. I mean, I can't even imagine that. And because what we do to ourselves without that, it was so moving, such an amazing story that you told in such a gorgeous way.
Thank you. Oh, thank you.
Yes, and I think it's almost time to open up for questions, but did you have anything else that you...
Do you want to
that
dance?
we did, yeah, we didn't touch upon? I really was struck by the sibling, how unique and unusual it was to have the sibling in your family who was the golden child died when you have no, so when you were so young you had no memory of her, but your whole family was, she was still the golden child. I mean, because everyone who's a parent, more than one child, they think the other child is the golden child. Mine do anyway. But there's usually someone that the family thinks is the favorite, and they're just I just know from your personal history and then from the book, just this kind of, there was the genuine grief that, and of course, that the parents went through, but also just this kind of presence that never went away, and that no one could really talk about. And I think most people can relate to that. I'm sure there's very healthy families that talk all the time about hard things, but most don't. And so I just think that that's what I found, so touching. But again, my favorite thing is that it never got grim. It just, there was always, a little bit of fun mixed in. So.
I did love the little prank you played on Halloween. Because it felt like Joyce was finally having some fun.
Well, the yoga people were real. That was really,
yoga people.
They really
right?
lived above us for 2 years. So yeah.
She really has the character, and in real life, the really were neighbor problems. That's why I love the Next Door, or what was it called? Small World. Yeah. Small World app. Anyway, any questions that any of you might have about them?
Yes.
Yes, I'll start. I can't wait to read the book, first of all. Very excited. I have to start by telling a very, very, very brief Nextdoor app story because it's so relevant to here, and I've never heard anything like this. One of my closest friends actually found a kidney donor
No.
in
No.
Houston for her husband through
Wow.
the Next app and Nextdoor app. So there you have it.
There you have
It's
it.
real.
Wow.
It's real.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it is.
That's
So-
amazing.
What was the
Did People Magazine write about it? I mean,
Not yet. Well, let's
Let's
okay,
get-
it's in process. We don't want to jinx it.
Okay.
Okay, it's that reason. It's
But
that
if
happened.
anybody here wants to actually go to any magazine
okay.
writers,
Yeah, that's a great story.
it's an incredible story. And
Now, the people on my Nextdoor app, they just complain about everybody
Everything.
and
Yeah.
everything. Yeah, the store used to be good. Now they're charging too much.
and this was somebody they didn't meet, and they're in Houston. So
They
were
didn't
actually,
meet?
They never met them until.
Oh,
next
I thought
door.
you said they didn't
No,
need
this
it.
wasn't their
They were
first.
just getting a kidney for in case.
There were like 20,000 people on this particular Nextdoor app because
God.
it's Houston. So anyway, that's super crazy.
That's a great story. I
Yeah,
love that.
it is. My question that I actually have for you is, I'm wondering, is your sister an artist or a storyteller or of any kind, and how, if she isn't, do you think she's processed what you
What's so
processed
funny you asked
for
that. My sister is a painter. She went to RISD and then moved out west, and she got married, had kids, and she's painted through the years, and now she's really trying to get back to painting. And she is so blocked. We've had a lot of conversations, and I'm trying to get her to like go away for a month or go away for a couple of weeks or whatever. But she's super blocked. But when she was at RISD, she did this incredible series where she took really old negatives from our family and from before we were born, even, but also when we were kids, like, and she blew them up on like vellum, and then she painted over them. And now there's so much stuff with like colorization, but at the time it was like very unusual what she was doing. And she did these really big ones, and I had one for years and years. I had it in New York, and then I had it in DC, and then like I opened the door and the wind came and whatever. But so but she did such great work, and then she started to do very different stuff, more abstract stuff. But she's really trying to get back to it. And she's so talented. And when the jacket was being designed, Echo, which I was so thrilled about, went to this artist Jessica Brilli. And she did this beautiful jacket based on a house in Cambridge that I had found online or whatever. And she went and looked at it and painted it. It's a beautiful, one of the most beautiful jackets. I love my jacket. And she also is known, I just thought this was such a great coincidence, but she also is known for, a lot of her paintings are taken from Kodachrome pictures from the 60s and 70s. And she's found boxes, like she'll go to flea markets, and she finds people's old slides. And she'll buy them like $5, it's a couple boxes or whatever. And she discovers in them these great slides and pictures, and she paints them. And I just thought it was so cool, because it's kind of like what my sister did or does. And I thought that was such a great, that's why the vibe of it, even though it's just a house. And then we got sort of friendly, via Instagram, because I was like, I love it so much, thank you. Oh, have I said thank you? So I love it. And then she emailed me and she said, I just was wondering, I'm going to be in Cambridge again, and I just thought if you want to have the painting, I'd like to give it to you. I thought you might be a nice thing to have. I was like, might? So she gave it to me. It's smaller than you think. It's bigger than the jacket, but it's not big, and it's the most beautiful thing. It's on wood, and it's on my wall. And as dusk falls, I swear to God, the windows, they glow. And I thought it was me, because have a little wine. That maybe am I imagining the gloaming, but no. A friend or two have come, and it's incredible. So, but I love that feeling of like that connection between the kind of work she does and, yeah. Yes.
So I read the book, and I love the book, and it's your best book,
Thank you.
and I want to read it again.
Yeah, it's so good, isn't it? We should have
And
a book
I
group.
love the character of Alan, who runs Camp Fantastic, and who it just makes me want to know if there was a real life Alan in his Steppenwolf t-shirt and his bearish, joyful qualities, and that he's really introduces joy into their world, and you realize how absent joy is, which is like a Jewish condition. And I just was curious if there was an inspiration for that character,
That's a
or
great
if it was
question.
wishful thinking.
No, Alan was not, he wasn't a real person, but that's such a great question, because I think when you grow up in a family like that, or if you grow up with any kind of issue, even if it's not like this, if you have one person that you connect with who sees you, it's like you'll be okay. And I don't think my sister had the same people that I had. I had a really close friend in high school, junior high school and high school, and it wasn't just my close friend, but it was her parents. They really saw me, and they thought, they were like, you're going to be a writer, you're going to be a writer. And it was like, just took one little person, or two people, I guess, who really just like, they could just see me. And I got none of that at home. I just never really, they didn't get me, and and I never felt understood. And a lot of us grew up that way, but, and I think when those two girls are at the camp, it's like a revelation that they are actually, they don't even understand, like, you're calling us the Mellishman girls, like they've never even been referred to as the three of them. They're not seen that way, or they're not seen as, Lydia has dyslexia and Joyce had a stutter, and has a stutter at the time in that part of the book. And, it's like, he sees it, he gets it, and it's like, it's fine, and like, okay, and it's the first time that they are like accepted, and also like, help, and so, yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it really was based on just that sense of like having someone who sees you, which saves you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Bruce.
Thank you all for doing this. I think we're all having a great time, and I'm interested in life stories, and I'm especially interested in one aspect of your life story, and that is you that's sort of emblematic, I think, of a lot of people. Like, you were around writing, then you wrote something, and you became very famous and beloved, and then you didn't write for a long time, and now you're writing again. And so I'm curious how how you see that story,
Mm.
and also how you as a writer are different today than you might have been a writer earlier in your life.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I always wanted to write, but again, I was raised, understandably so, as like, you need a job with benefits. And I never ever thought that I would just come out of school and start writing. Like, so I came to New York, went to the Radcliffe Publishing course, and I ended up, we thought we were all going to stay in Boston and work at Little Brown. All 10 of us, but one job. Somebody got it. The rest of us had no job. So everyone moved to New York, and so I came along, and I thought anyway, I ended up at Random House where I met Julie Grau, and I was in publishing for 10 years, and I became a publicist, and I worked for different parts, and the job was really hard and really difficult in many ways, and it was also like a wonderful, wonderful environment. I met my best friends there. I'm still friends with them. I love book people. And so I left after 10 years because I was burnt out, and I went to Washington and got a government job at the Smithsonian. I was home every day at 5:20, and I, finished my novel. And when I guess I finished that when I was 34, maybe 34, 35. You have a whole different, you want to be clever. And so the next few books I wrote were all about kind of like clever, like what's the situation? Oh, it's like, okay, you're getting married, and like there's an ex, and I still love those books because they're also pieces of my, journey through things that also other friends were going through at the same time. I mean, if you're female and you're a certain age, you are worried about you're going to have kids. You are, is the bus going to come ever? Or, and so each book was very personal to me, and I loved each book, even though the reviewers did not. And then I got to my fourth one, and that was it. It was sort of like everything converged where the book just kind of died, and I got breast cancer, and it just was like, and then an agent of mine just was basically like, maybe you should stop writing fiction for a while. And another writer would have said, in fact, my husband was like, time to get another agent. But I was like, oh no, I'm going to stop writing fiction because obviously it's, And so I stopped, and it's not her fault. It was like, I listened, and and other people wouldn't have listened, and they would have written through it. But it came at a time when I could not write anymore. There was a lot going on at home, and the writers in the room know, like, to generate your own story, you have to write your own stuff. And so I turned to ghostwriting because it was like an easier, as awful as ghostwriting is, as hard as it is. Like, I'm reading Spare, and it's a work of art. I mean, it's amazing. And as hard as it is, it's like you have a built-in story. It's like a job. And so it was like a relief in a way not to have to write. And it was also really, really sad because I love when I'm writing, as much as we joke about we hate it, it's so awful, and I hate it. You love it when it's going well. The few times it's actually going well. To be able to write this book and tell a story like this, or my last book, which I really loved writing too, it's like you love it. So I really missed it, and I had no belief I was ever going to do it again. I mean, I just could not. Nothing. I would write little things here and there, and I started to just write like Instagram posts. It was so sad. I was like, wow, I like that. It's a little paragraph. And I was like, oh my God. And then I had done stuff over the years, and I'd written a script, and of course it didn't sell. And I had done this, and it didn't sell. And then all the stuff that I had sort of done that didn't work, didn't go anywhere, I just used, and I was working, and then I just started separation anxiety, and it was like clawing back, and I think at that point I just wanted to tell a very different kind of story, like the clever, like even with this, like again I would have had a whole sub thing with the poetry and no, like that doesn't interest me anymore, like it just doesn't, like that. I want to just tell a story, these kinds of stories that have a really kind of tender heart to them, because when you're at I just turned 60, and you just you get to an age where like you've seen a lot, and you can see a lot when you're 22, but when you have a lot of loss and stuff like that, as we all have, it's like things that I thought were funny are not that funny anymore. Like even it's always like and there are tons of assholes in the world. I mean, you don't have to like turn every person into a saint, but like I'm not interested in just like the joke. Like if the yoga people are going to be really annoying, I want there to be some payoff. Like, well, what is the message, or what can come from that? like something will come from that. And so I'm always looking for that, because in my life, something has always come from the bad stuff. And I never think it's like a good thing. I don't ever think like, well, it happened for a reason. It doesn't. It just happens. But I've always had like something really cool come out of something. And so I love that feeling of hope and I want to write stories that are kind of like end up there. So, yeah. Yes, John.
Could you tell us a little more about that 9-day period of purgatory while your sister was reading it? You didn't get that. Because I think a lot of people who think about writing anything personal, that window is enough
to jump out.
Well, I have to say, and that question was just asked by John Hendrickson, whose memoir is coming a week from now, and it's called Life on Delay, Making Peace with a Stutter. And this book is so beautiful. We've become Instagram buds. And I got extracted a PDF from his publicist, and it's just the most amazing book. It's a really beautifully written book, and there's a sort of a sibling aspect to it too. And I, thought the way you are all going to read this book when it comes out in a week, but you handled a lot of really difficult family stuff, and I was just really in awe of how you did it. It was just with so much grace and honesty, and it was like, I'm sure it was very hard because your family is around. It's different when they're not. I think it's so much easier, but it was really hard to wait, and you start to question. I started to really rack my brain. Like there were just a few little things in there that I just got in, maybe because that's how I am. I guess I think I got in one or two little things, fictional, but and I thought, oh God, I should have taken them out, or maybe I shouldn't have. Oof, I just went. I said I wasn't gonna, and I did get really nervous. I got really nervous because I thought I really fictionalized so much of her, and it wasn't her, but I mean I fictionalized so much of the sisters and the situation. But that time of waiting, you feel so sick because first of all, the last thing I would want to do, she was so wounded too in our family that it's not, I would never want her to read that and sort of feel in any way like shitty. And luckily, I don't think she did. I think she just, it was heavy, like it was hard to read. And it's a hard thing to write, and then I think it's a brave thing when your family is mine was very different because it's fictionalized, but I think when you're writing a memoir, especially, and your book is just like, it's amazing.
And what's it called again?
Life on Delay, Making Peace with a Stutter.
All right.
I think actually people see themselves more in fiction than nonfiction because, of the people that I know that write fiction, I'm always seeing things. Nonfiction, when they're writing about people, you're like, that's not really what she's like, that's, it's interesting. It is very interesting.
I think you can be more honest in fiction.
Yeah.
I've always said that because I think people don't you think I've written characters that I think, oh no, and no one ever sees themselves as a raging narcissist. They don't, that's not them, so
Yeah.
I think you can really be more honest and explore characters in more depth in fiction. But if you're brave enough to write about your living family, I salute you.
But it's also, I think, intention, and when I was reading your book especially, I think it was so clear that your intention was not to wound.
Right.
And I think some books are written with the intention to wound. Like there's...
And I don't like that.
I know, I like bitterness.
My first book was a straight memoir about my life and my parents, and everybody was there. And my mother read it, and there was a word that made her so unhappy.
What was it? What was the word?
Come on.
that my therapist had said, you
Oh.
might look at her as negligent.
Oh.
And she
The
said,
word all mothers
and-
want.
and I was like, it's out.
Yeah.
Who cares?
Yeah.
It's gone. She wasn't, but you might look at anybody as
Right,
being
right.
negligent. But no, yes. I mean, as now, I mean, I had a 2-year-old then, and I was like, she did all this wrong, my mother. Now I'm like, God bless you. A miracle you had 3 kids and they all, aren't
Jail.
on top of a building with an AK-47. But yeah, I mean, it's hard.
Please excuse my daughter is the book that Julie's referring to. One of the funniest books you'll ever read. Just saying that. Just want to throw that in there. Throw your little bone there.
Thanks.
It's true.
Thanks. It's out of print, but know it would
Oh,
be.
is it?
Not after tonight.
Woo! We just got a request for 4 books, everybody. Easy Street.
Reprint.
I think that's about the
Great.
time we have.
Oh, but we were going to be here till 10.
We were about to sing.
No,
We were just
no.
gonna start singing.
Sleepover. Let's all do
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
I'm just gonna pop back up here for one more quick note. As I said earlier, Laura's going to be signing and personalizing books at the table next to where you checked in. My wonderful coworker Jenny is gonna lead you to where you should line up. We have plenty of additional books available for purchase at the register, as well as Julie and Ann's books as well. And I'm sure if you ask nicely enough, they'll sign for you too. If you're still with us on the YouTube live stream, you can buy a copy of Small World using the link in the live stream description. All right, that's all. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. And thank you to you for writing.